Welcome and thank you for joining us on this first series of webinar on the effects of the oil spill in Mauritius. My name is Adish Madhu and I'm a GIS specialist working with the Norwegian Refugee Council, and I'm assigned currently with the United Nations Population Fund. So with a small group of 4 Mauritians from the diaspora, from Canada, from Ireland and the UAE, we have launched exactly a week ago now a Crisis Diaspora Appeal Platform, which aims at engaging and channeling efforts towards the crisis response. Our initiative has no political affiliation, and its first objective is to support and give visibility to several organizations in need, particularly non-governmental organizations. And our first objective is to fundraise, and we've set up a campaign to go initially to the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation. We've already reached more than 13,000 euros today, and the MWF, the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation, is represented today by its conservation director, Mr. Vikash Tataya. Welcome, Vikash. The second objective of our platform is to create a pool of expertise to exchange and provide know-how and skills directly to the actors on the ground, therefore giving a voice to global experts and Mauritians around the world, indeed concerned and ready to help in their own capacity. And this together is what we have put as a motto. Our webinar today, and we are truly honored, is bringing together eminent specialists, both international and from the diaspora, to present an exchange on the short and long-term impacts of the spill. So I wish to sincerely thank you all for having responded to our calls and very graciously offered your knowledge and insights with us on this platform. So joining us from the UK is our moderator tonight, depending on where you are, is Nishal Suredu, is a Mauritian and a director at the global leading engineering and consultancy firm, Royal Haskoning DHV. And Nishal brings long expertise and experience in the maritime, shipping and logistics sector, notably in Latin America, Africa and Europe. And Nishal will be presenting our panelist. I will let him take over after. So welcome, Nishal. Allow me just to remind you of the etiquette, the casual etiquette rules for everyone. Mics will be muted, only the speaker will be heard. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And so if you have any questions, please send them via the chat option. So without further ado, as an introduction to our talk on the effects of the oil spill, let us hear one of the major actors on the ground, directly involved with minimizing these impacts, protecting and safeguarding the unique wildlife and ecosystem of the Southeast Lagoon of Mauritius. Vikash, the floor is yours.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. And it's great to be here and to find a lot of very familiar faces and ex-staff members and colleagues. And it's fantastic to be joining you and the Mauritian diaspora to talk about this big problem, unprecedented, as everybody would say. Now, you asked me to say what we've done since the wreck and since the oil spill. Well, we literally had this wreck on a Saturday night, and we have been hitting the ground running ever since, and especially after we had the oil spill. And it has been non-stop work for the field team, for several managers, and even for myself and several others in the organization. So very, very busy. And you know that when we had the oil spill, we actually implemented a plan that we already had in place, which we had finalized just the day before, believe it or not. And it was a 3-tier response to, it was a response to 3-tier oil spill. And we never really thought we'd go to a tier 3 one, but we had it there anyway. And when on the 6th of August, we had an oil spill, we literally went into tier 3 response strategy, and which was to remove very rare plants, critically endangered plants, which were in the nursery, also removing not all the birds, but the critically endangered Mauritius olive white-eye, Mauritius foodies, which are endangered. We had to release some of the captive reptiles on the island itself, and we've had to take away some captive fruit bats to another location. And it's been hard work. It's been hard work, and the team has been trying to work under very difficult conditions because there's the stench of petroleum on the island, and you cannot spend long hours without having headaches, sore eyes, dry skin, and lots of other symptoms as well. So it's been very tough. We've had to reduce the work that we do on the island, and we've also joined in the efforts to mop up the oil. So we have a team with a boat that is attached literally with the National Coast Guard, and we've been mopping oil from in front of Îles et Grèves, but also Maïberg waterfront, Rivière des Créoles, parts of Blue Bay, and so on. So we've done a lot of this control work. What's going ahead now is, again, and just to say also that we are on lots of committees. I mean, there's tons of committees by the civil society, by the government as well. So we join these committees and we try to participate in decision making as well, and lots of interviews. I mean, we are bombarded. There's myself and one of my colleagues, Jean-Luc Garden, who is the fundraising manager and communications manager. We've been literally bombarded by press from all over the world, and giving our views, giving our positions on various matters and responding. Going forward, we'll continue to communicate. We will continue to work with the authorities, and we are also thinking about how we now decontaminate Îles et Grèves. We've also worked on offshore islands to remove highly threatened endemic geckos, which we are now planning to send to Jersey in UK, in the Channel Islands. We are also starting to think about the legal aspect of it. For example, compensation. So how are we going to start working on putting together a compensation that is a right amount, reflects the right amount for the damage that's been caused, and the long-term damage in particular is what we're interested in. And if there are any environmental lawyers who've done such kinds of things there, please reach out, and because we need your advice. We've never done anything of the sort ourselves.
Thank you very much, Vikash. Let us now invite Nishal to moderate. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. And thank you, Adish, Vikash, and Lalini, all the team for organizing this, which I think is a great initiative. It's my great pleasure to be part of it. My name is Nishal Suredu. So I'm a Mauritian, born and raised in Mauritius. I lived there for the first 20 years of my life. And then I moved abroad. I've been living in various places. I'm now based in the UK. I'm an economist by background. I have 15 years experience in port economic feasibility and market studies. And I lead a team of consultants. We're called Ocean Shipping Consultant, and part of a company, Royal Haskoning, which is one of the leading port engineering companies in the world. Now, just to say a few words in the context of what happens, and to understand a little bit how these things can happen. The route off the coast of Mauritius via the Cape of Good Hope is one of the largest shipping route, and that's largely due to the growth of countries, mainly China, but also other countries in South Asia and the Far East in the last 20 years, which have really driven the demand for raw materials such as oil, such as iron ore, coal, and other minerals. And a lot of the countries that are producing, exporting these materials, one of the main one is Brazil, and the other one is South Africa. So you get a lot of trade between Brazil and China and other countries in the Far East. So how do you get from Brazil to China? You can either go west, but if you go west, you have to go through the Cape Horn, and the Cape Horn is treacherous. It's not really used by cargo ships. Because of the weather and the dangers that it entails. or you can go via the Panama Canal, which involves very high tolls, and it's very expensive, and it's also a little bit longer than the eastward route. So the eastward route goes via South Africa, and the ships goes off the coast of Mauritius towards Asia. South Africa is also one of the big exporters of raw material. So last year, for example, Brazil exported 80 billion US dollars of oil and oil products. And South Africa exported 38 billion US dollars of oil and precious metals. So as a result of that, every year you have hundreds of ships passing off the coast of Mauritius. The majority of these ships tend to keep a safe distance, which is more or less about 15 nautical miles from the coast, the south coast. Unfortunately, some incidents do happen, like this one. And we do get sometimes an incident like the Wakashio with potentially disastrous consequences. So as much as this is a very unfortunate event, I think we are nonetheless very fortunate to be here all reunited with a panel of a selection of great experts globally, experts in their respective fields. And I'm really looking forward to having some very interesting discussion and sharing knowledge and information from this group around this very important topic. So let me then now move into introducing our first panelist, which is Donald Bush. Donald is a professor of marine science, and from 1990 to 2017, he was the president of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. From 2006 to 2017, he also served as Vice Chancellor for Environmental Sustainability for the University System of Maryland. In 2010, he was appointed by President Obama as a member of the National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill and offshore drilling to investigate the root cause of the blowout at the Macondo prospect in the Gulf of Mexico. So I'd like now to pass the virtual microphone to Donald.
Yes, well, good afternoon and good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to join you. I must admit, I have to be humble because I don't know that much about Mauritius or this spill, but my experience, of course, that's relevant has to do with the Deepwater Horizon oil well blowout, which of course was massive, much larger. It resulted in the release of about 4 million barrels of oil. Actually, the oil spread out and covered an area of about 1,800 kilometers along the coast in 5 states, and it lasted for about three months. So obviously, these are not directly comparable, but there are some lessons I think learned that could be helpful to you, and that's what I want to try to accomplish here. The first one is that the important nature of coordination. You know, in our society, in our governments, we have various agencies responsible for different things. So it's important for them to come together and work as a team to be able to share the knowledge and to deal with the strategies to contain the damage, reduce the damage, and respond to the spill. In the US in 2010, actually our federal government did a fairly good job of doing that, working across the agencies, dealing with the agency responsible for the ocean and weather and the Environmental Protection Agency and the Coast Guard and US Geological Survey and those agencies that deal with fish and wildlife resources. Where the problems seem to occur is where those agencies had to then interact with local governments who didn't know about all of these organization and arrangements, and they had different expectations about what kind of response there would be and how effective it would be. So coordination is very important, not only during responding to a spill, but afterwards. Secondly is to make sure that one avoids creating worse harm than has already happened with the spill. Sometimes by trying to remove oil by heavy mechanical means, washing, using chemicals or others, there can be longer term damage that results worse than the damage of the oil. This oil, most oils, especially in your warmer environment, is going to degrade and go away eventually. So you don't want to do more damage than necessary in the cleanup. The third, I think, lesson is use this opportunity to direct some resources from the responsible parties, from the international philanthropies, whatever those resources may be, to understand the effects of this spill. And by doing that, one can also learn a lot about the environment in which you live in. Some things you really didn't really know, and some things which you've been interested in but haven't had the opportunity to study, because that's long-term knowledge that can be built for the future of managing your natural resources and dealing with future oil spills. In particular, try to build some capacity within your scientific community, as using this unfortunate incident as an opportunity to do so. In the US, one of the things that happened, for example, was the responsible party, BP in this case, actually came forward because of all the bad publicity and committed $500 million, that's $500 million, for a 10-year study that went on, just winding up now. 10 years began in 2010. And there's a tremendous amount of knowledge about the Gulf of Mexico that's going to be very useful going forward. And then the fourth point I want to make is that the responsible party should be held liable for the damages, and for paying for the smart restoration that's going to be necessary. By smart restoration, I mean not just fixing every little bit in detail of the damage. That really can't be done, but actually trying to address also some of the root causes that might have caused the degradation of the environment over the long run. So the 4 points: coordination, avoid creating worse damage than the oil caused, direct some resources into learning about not only the spill, but your environment, and then finally hold the parties responsible for paying for those, restoring those damages, but dealing with the root causes of the longer term environmental challenges that you have in the process. So anyway, that's my quick key top messages.
Thank you, Donald. We're going to have some questions towards the end, so I will now move along to our different panelists. And the next person on the panel is NICKY CARIGLIA. And NICKY spent 15 years working across the sphere of marine environmental management. Her expertise is in pollution, emergency response, environmental impact mitigation, and assessment, and fisheries. In 2019, she set up Marittima Limited to provide bespoke environmental consultancy and incident response services to the maritime and shipping sector. NICKY, floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak here. And thank you for that introduction. My experience is pretty much from across the world. I've responded to about 30 oil spills in 5 continents. And my specialism really is in tropical remote locations. So Lalini asked me to put together just a couple of slides to talk from. There's nothing life-changing in them, but it's really just to give me a frame of reference to talk from. So I'll just bring that up. Oh, it's been disabled. Okay, screen sharing is not enabled at the moment. So really what I wanted to focus on was, in 10 minutes, what would be my key recommendations based on what I've been hearing from friends and people on the ground, but also what have I learned from other spills in the past. And it's quite refreshing to see that actually a lot of my key messages are similar to Don's. So let me just try now to share my screen. Here we go. It's not up there. Okay, it's not working at the moment. So essentially, as Don said, for me, if I were to go in country and you're at a phase where you're still in the reactive point of the response, you still have bulk oil, the oil has hit the shoreline. And at this point, what I understand, the volunteers there in Mauritius are doing a great job with recovering this bulk oil. At this phase, it's pretty well understood what you need to do on a day-to-day basis. The concern, given the complete huge volume of media attention, of international agencies, of national and international private contractors, will be coordinating these people. Now, various parts of the world will use different approaches to managing incidents. In the US, they have a very sophisticated way of managing it through ICS, it's called, but that's not necessarily, I found, relevant or helpful in smaller states. Really, what you would want to do is ensure that from a coordination point, everyone in the command center has a role in communicating both to the volunteers and to the private contractors who are out there doing the response. And the number one way of doing this is gathering intelligence. Now that we have oil on the shoreline, you want to have a general understanding of both the extent and the nature of contamination and how that changes. So even undertaking basic shoreline assessments, where people will go out and take GPS points of thick accumulations of oil, the different types of habitat that have been oiled, as well as the logistical points of interest, such as good areas for waste storage, good access points to the beach. And all this information will be housed or will be obtainable by various people involved in the response. But you do want those in charge to collate all that information, to provide a unique common operating picture, it's called, where you can actually then start to make decisions as to how do we respond to certain areas. You want to break down the shorelines, you want to break down the activities of what works in certain areas. A really key point for me in these situations is that you'll often have many private contractors trying to sell huge volumes of equipment and of technology. In my experience, at this point, once the oil has hit the shoreline, a very sensitive shoreline in many areas, it will really become a matter of coordinating labor and manpower. And whether that's ensuring that the volunteers that have already been doing a great job are trained and are provided with PPE, or whether it's also ensuring that the various contractors there are working together, being directed by someone. Now, I don't know how the situation is on the ground right now in Mauritius, but an ideal scenario would be to maintain good relationships between the P&I club, the insurer, and the government, because that will help with cost recovery later. To have them all making decisions together about all the various entities involved will lead to a far reduced headache. So really, coordination and knowledge gathering at this stage in the command center, I would say, is critical to build up something that works for everyone as you move into the proactive phase of the response, when it becomes planned rather than an emergency reaction. As a second point, having spoken again, echoing Don, we have this situation where, yes, there will probably be a lot of oil, and you will probably have a lot of willing volunteers, a lot of people who want to help. It will be important to identify where you can help by removing ever more oil, and where in certain areas aggressive treatment techniques will not be suitable. And for me, the main concern are the mangroves. I did a spill in the Philippines about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, and there was a study followed up afterwards. So in some of the areas, people were trampling to access the oil, lots of trampling. The oil became embedded into the sediment. Parts of the trees were cut to remove the oil. And in another area, nothing was done. The oil was left as it was. It was in quite an exposed area. It was flushed by tides. And actually, the mangrove that was not touched, there was no response in that, recovered far more quickly. So once you are able to ascertain the degree of oiling in those mangroves, it will also be essential to say, where can we safely and easily access points to recover? And where is this going to do more damage than good, and where do we leave it? So that is also one of my main tips, probably. And something that will be the #1 issue in any island nation during an oil spill is waste management. Waste management will at some point definitely become a headache. Oil spills generate huge amounts of waste, which often have to be treated as hazardous material. So therefore, if you have volunteers, personnel, the #1 benefit you can do is to segregate waste. You will also be recovering all sorts of unoiled material, wrapping, packaging, keep those wastes segregated. So that's the first thing you will be able to do. The second point, the storage becomes an issue. So when you're recovering, when you're moving stuff from the beach, you need somewhere to temporarily store it. In my experience, if this is not planned, you can often cause more contamination at the storage location, which goes back to the first point, which is why now at this mapping point, you need to identify logistical spaces as well, close to your beaches for access. However, it doesn't matter how well and how efficient the response is, I'm guessing that you will also need some long-term storage. The reason for this is that most ultimate treatment methods for the waste will take some time to decide upon, and also there may be an issue of capacity. So identifying a covered storage space where you can leave oily material for quite a while will be essential to the response. And a final point, getting to the waste treatment. We have a lot of beautiful regulations in the EU and in the world, such as the Basel Convention, such as the EU Waste Regulation Framework Directive. The problem with these are all aimed to more responsibly manage the waste we generate. The issue I found with these is that they don't tend to take into account emergency situations. Therefore, you may often, last year I was on a spill, a response on a really remote island in the Solomon Islands, Rennell Island. And there was a bauxite mine there, and they were importing people to pave roads. They were all dirt roads, and they were importing asphalt and machinery to pave these roads. I suggested that my ideal thing would have been to reuse a lot of the oily sediment into those roads. It was oil, it was appropriate for what they were using, low-grade roads, because there were very few cars. However, because of the various conventions in place, because of the perspectives of waste management and it being responsible, ultimately the decision took a long time, and I understand that still several thousand tons of waste remain in the capital in Honiara in a warehouse because of all these leaps to overcome. So if the government can identify any incineration plants, the cement plants, any refineries, any kind of heavy industry there or in the vicinity regionally, and you can come up with a way of circumventing these normally very useful regulations, I think that would also save you a headache in the long run in terms of proper management. And then as a final note, I did want to, let me just see, I will share with Lalini some of the materials. My final point was on claims, both for those impacted by the spill in terms of fishermen, and both as regards the environmental monitoring you may want to undertake. So environmental monitoring, as covered by international conventions, needs to be undertaken with certain criteria in mind. It needs to be very visible that the questions that are being asked, it cannot be generic environmental modeling. CFAS in the UK, CEFAS, they published something called the PREMIAM guidelines, PREMIAM guidelines, which you can freely download. It's a guideline on how to develop an incident-specific post-incident monitoring program, ensuring that you clearly have questions related to the spill that you'd like answering will make it more likely that the insurer will see that these comply with international conventions and will be admissible for compensation. As John also said, abstract, general, unlikely to work reinstatement measures is not what is covered by the international convention, and indeed the polluters are not required to pay for such things. Instead, by undertaking this monitoring and identifying what may have been damaged, coming up with good projects to reinstate that damage in some way is actually something that is covered and can be presented for compensation. So that's the environmental side. In terms of fisheries, I know a lot of people will have been affected. And I know that there's, in Mauritius, you have from industrial fisheries, but a lot of artisanal and subsistence fisheries. The message you want to get across is that everything has to be really well documented. Photos, narratives, and descriptions. And then for the more organized cooperatives or industrial fishers, also receipts and what they've been earning in the last few years and catches, stuff like that. I do have 2 useful links, which I will share. Hopefully Lalini can send it around to everyone at the end of this. But those are really my main points. And yeah, thank you. And is Lalini, is that over to you, or is that back to Michelle?
Thank you, Nikki. And well, apologies for the delay there in between the different panels, because it needs to go to the host and then from the host back to me. So it takes a bit of time. But thank you very much for your thoughts, Nikki. And I will now move to Vanessa Ryan, who is a Marine Conservation Officer at WWF in Finland. Vanessa, I don't have your bio, so I'll let you introduce yourself. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. So as Nishal said, I'm Vanessa Ryan. I work with Marine Conservation in Finland for WWF and have been involved with coordinating voluntary oil spill responders for the past 10 years, pretty much. So I'd like to wish you all a good morning, a good day and a good evening to those, depending on which time zone you are in. And thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I seriously really hope that this will bring some added value to the desperate situation you're facing and will help you move on with the response. Lalini, would you share my presentation, please? Thank you very much. You can move on to slide number 2, please. So while Lalini is opening the presentation, just a quick background why I am here today, and very grateful to be so. WWF in Finland has been coordinating voluntary oil spill responders since 2003. And at the moment we have close to, or actually over 9,000 registered volunteers in our database. And we organize several trainings every year together with the authorities, and also just internal trainings for our staff and our responders, our volunteers, in shoreline response and also in old wildlife response. So for us, it's very important to keep a ready troop for a possible oil spill in Finnish or Baltic waters. Next one, please. So there are many things that my points have in common with Don's and Nikki's presentations. One of them would obviously be coordination. That is an issue both within NGOs and between NGOs and authorities. So the first step here for safely and successfully using voluntary, you can go back one, thank you, for safely and successfully using volunteers in oil spill response would be to establish trust between the NGOs and the oil spill authorities that they are working under or for or with. So the main goal is to have everyone working for a joint goal, and also the authorities appreciating and understanding the added value that the volunteers can bring to the overall oil spill response organization. That way you can also make joint decisions on, for example, resource purchases for volunteers, PPE, different resources that the volunteers will need, and also make sure that everything goes according to what is demanded by the claims, for example, claims processes. So coordination is key here as well. That also helps when you clearly define the roles and responsibilities of certain organizations, and also within NGOs define what your possible role could be. Together with the authorities, it's important to define what a volunteer can actually do, what are the tasks that a volunteer can perform safely, and also evaluate which kind of working environments require certain types of protective equipment, for example, and which sites are safe to access. Also here it is important to remember what NICKY mentioned, so making sure that the methods you're using when you are for example, cleaning beaches does not damage the environment further, and also that you're not spreading the oil into areas that have been previously unoiled. Another very important point is proper documentation. So making sure that your volunteers are registered in a database on a sheet of paper, whichever way you can document them. Make sure that you have worksheets, work rotation, staffing, everything documented. Also, preferably make sure that you have an insurance for your volunteers in case of accidents and incidents that are very likely to occur. This is also, documentation is also very important for claims purposes, where you need to have proof of work hours that you worked, of PPE that you've purchased, etc. Everything has to be black on white. And last but not least, make sure that you have access to healthcare for the volunteers that are working with the oil, because as you all know, oil can be a very dangerous substance when not dealt with properly. Next one, please. Thank you. So this is the model that we use in Finland. It might not be directly transferable to other organizations or other countries. We do work together with other voluntary organizations, and the role for WWF in this instance is on one hand beach cleaning, and on the other one oiled wildlife response. So we would work under a coordinator for the voluntary work, who would be our point of contact to the authorities. Other organizations would work with voluntary search and rescue or logistics, especially relating to transport, waste management that was mentioned by NICKY as well. And within the beach cleaning, we would have a separate coordinator for whom, under whom we would have troop leaders. And one troop leader is responsible for 2 to 5 groups consisting of 10 volunteers. So if you start at the bottom of the chart, the little blue box, you see an individual volunteer would work under a group leader who is responsible for 10 volunteers. And the group leader would work under a troop leader who would be responsible for 2 to 5 groups. We have estimated that a troop would be responsible for approximately 1 kilometer of shoreline, depending on the severity of the oiling, and one group would work at a 200-meter stretch approximately. This can be altered depending on the circumstances. In oiled wildlife response, then, it might not be as acute for you, the situation at the moment, but there we would also divide our volunteers in different teams under different leaders. So this is just an image or a chart to help you visualize how we do it in Finland. Next one, please. So the issue that I suppose that you're having, and which also has been very impressive for me to watch from a distance or follow from a distance, the amount of convergent volunteers, people who are willing to just step up and say, we're going to help with this crisis. It's very impressive. But one thing that I have been very worried about is the health and safety of the volunteers. So basically no one should have to work in direct contact with oil without training. So what we do in Finland as well is we do accept convergent volunteers, and we are ready for that. But all convergent volunteers have to undergo what we call a rapid training. So it would be a few hours. We have training material, unfortunately, only in Finnish available for that purpose. And the main points here is to make the volunteers who are joining the operation understand what their role in the overall effort, where they slot in, what the importance is of their role. Of course, health and safety, using personal protective equipment in the correct way and understanding how important that is. And also the point that I mentioned earlier, to avoid causing secondary damage to the environment. So that is very important. And we also teach volunteers how to mark the beach so that only personnel with clean PPE can work in unoiled parts of the beach, and volunteers who are working in oily conditions do not step over a certain boundary. So one recommendation would obviously be to make a volunteer management plan. Maybe that exists already. If so, very good. If not, that would be an option. And one thing that we've learned by experience, and that's probably too late for you already because you have had thousands of people signing up and working on different very important tasks, is to start smaller and expand gradually when possible and when you have the resources to safely do so. Next one, please. That was it for me. Thank you very much. These are just brief, short points. I hope that they are helpful, and I'm very happy to provide more information should anyone want it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. We'll now move to RAISSA PHILBERT. And RAISSA is actually our one Mauritian that we have on the panel. She works as an environmental and information specialist for Hatfield Consultants based in Vancouver. After a PhD in marine biogeochemistry, RAISSA worked as an environmental consultant and marine data analyst. Interests revolve around reproducible data analysis for environmental sciences, as well as the links between science and policy. RAISSA, over to you.
Thank you, Nishal. Yes, as Nishal said, I am Mauritian. Similar to Nishal, I grew up in Mauritius and then I went to study, and unfortunately I haven't come back yet. I have looked at this, following from a distance, and I am very concerned because, as I've mentioned to Vikash and Adish, I've been very impressed with the work that's done on Île aux Aigrettes. I love Blue Bay, I love that area. I've spent so much time there as a teenager, and looking at it in this state is very worrying to me. And I think I had like a bit of more technical discussion, but I just wanted to jump off points that both Don and Nikki made about coordination and kind of looking at why we would be doing any kind of monitoring. So essentially I had some discussion about, well, what are the questions that we are looking at? So we have concerns. I'm concerned I have obviously an emotional attachment to the area, but on a scientific basis, what are our concerns? So as we know, the oil contains toxic chemicals that can affect the fish, and the fish and it affects the crustaceans. But so we need to know how much is in the fish. So, for example, after the Deepwater Horizon, they closed the fisheries for a while, for a few months, up to a year in certain areas, and they were testing the fish. They were testing it, and then they did calculations. What is the risk of getting cancer from eating this fish? What is the risk that this will affect human health? And we can't say, okay, we're good to go, or don't eat this fish at all, this is terrible, if we don't measure it. So that's one example of where long-term monitoring is important. We have an island where it was a nature reserve. We have concerns about how is the water coming in, how's that affecting the plants, the birds, all of this life that's around. And we can't know unless we measure it. There are examples of the chemicals accumulating in the sand and the mud. And in some cases, there are examples where oil has remained in the mud, in the marsh for 30 years. But is that actually going to be the case in this area? Maybe not, because the sediments are different. And we can only know this when we measure on a regular basis. So for example, there was an oil spill in Korea, and they took, in the first year, they took measurement of sediments. They measured the chemicals every month, and then after that, they started measuring every year. And they could see, okay, things decreased, and now we are getting better. We can start more of a recovery process. And like what Don was saying, we can understand better what is happening in our environment. I thought it was interesting that NICKY mentioned the CFAS guidelines. It's a very good set of guidelines that I was also considering. And one of the biggest things that the CFAS guidelines mention is when we start monitoring, we can't just go out and start collecting samples and samples and samples. That's just not cost effective. I mean, we have fish, we have sediments, we have water, and we don't have those resources. Lab costs are expensive, and if we just go measure randomly, we won't be answering a question. We will go to a regulator and they'll be like, well, you don't have enough samples to actually back up what you're saying here. So we have to look very carefully at why we want to monitor. So there's different reasons. We want to assess the state of the ecosystem in general. Is our ecosystem healthy? Are things working correctly, or are we having problems? Can we reopen the fisheries? What are the effects on the population? Can we back up our claims to the polluter? What is the impact for conservation? Is the cleanup working? And all of those questions, sure, they have some overlaps, but we need to identify priorities, and there's that need for coordination. Because I have, Vikash might be interested in the impact on conservation. Someone else might be more interested in the fisheries specifically. How do we coordinate to make sure that all of those questions get answered in the most cost-effective way? And at this stage, I think one of the most important questions is to characterize the nature of the oil. What is in this oil? Because if we don't know this, we won't know what are the risks of contamination, like what are the potential impacts. So that, for me, is the first step that we need to know is what type of oil is this? What is the mix of chemicals that we have in here? Because some, the different types of oil will have different toxicities and different impacts. And there are a number of ways of monitoring. A lot of it revolves about technical sampling. We can make use of satellite imagery, which has already started. We are looking at satellite. We are using satellite imagery to see where the oil is going. But there are other options as well for, say, for example, mangroves can be monitored using satellite imagery, and you can see whether whether something is, what's happening in the mangrove. Is a mangrove dying slowly? Is it recovering? What is what is happening and what is happening there? And I think for me that is my main message, is we need to come up with a coordinated monitoring plan and really think carefully about the questions that we want to address. What is it exactly that we need to know? Otherwise, we're just going to go in all sorts of directions, and we're not going to have a good answer that will help us. Either go up to the polluter and say, "This is what you've done," or we won't be able to know if we can eat our fish. We won't be able to know if we can go back to swimming. a lot of questions. I'm not here with answers, unfortunately, because, well, we haven't measured anything yet. So we need to think about how we're going to go about monitoring and what we need to answer. Yeah, back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, RAISSA. I'll now move to Christian BUEGER. Christian is a professor of international relations specializing in maritime security and ocean governance at the University of Copenhagen. He's an experienced researcher in the field of maritime security, ocean governance, and the blue economy. His research covered issues such as piracy, organized crime at sea, fishery crimes, maritime domain awareness, maritime security strategies, small island states, regional ocean governments, as well as the politics of the Western Indian Ocean and the wider the Pacific. Christian, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind of introduction. And let me start in congratulating actually the organizers for putting together this very important panel. And I think it's super important that the attention actually keeps high, not the least that there will be also many volunteers in the future. I like to zoom out a little bit and look at the broader context and also the political context in terms of how we might want to prevent future oil spill like this. As NICKY has highlighted, these events, these catastrophes happen much more often than we actually think. And I think this is just fully unacceptable. And we really have to ask ourselves what went wrong here and how can we set up response mechanisms that avoid an event of this to occur again, whether that's in Mauritius or another small island state. And I think here we really need a public investigation in terms of what went wrong here. And I think there are in particular two areas that need investigation here. And the first one is the question, could the Coast Guard have intercepted that vessel, the Wakashio, before it actually grounded? Now, Mauritius, like other countries, is setting up maritime surveillance centers. They are also called maritime domain awareness centers. And given that the vessel was on straight collision course to Mauritius, the Coast Guard could have picked it up, and there most likely would have been enough time to intercept the vessel. So why did this not happen? The second set of questions we should ask are around the initial response. What actually happened in these 2 weeks before the vessel started to break up? What kind of response was undertaken there? How well did the coordination with the industry work, the salvage company that was sent in, and so on? Why was there not enough attention to anticipate that something like this could happen? I think these are two super important questions to ask, not necessarily because it's a question of blaming anyone in the government, but it's a matter of learning what went wrong here. And this is in particular important against the backdrop that before the spill occurred, Mauritius was actually something like the poster boy of regional oil spill prevention. So they were seen, Mauritius was seen as leading in this field, and it received quite substantial capacity building assistance over the last 10, 15 years. Only in March this year, there was a workshop on it, and governmental officials attended and demonstrated the oil spill contingency plan. So we have to ask ourselves, why did these regional programs not work, and what was actually missing in the contingency planning? Today we have already learned about one thing that was missing, which is to think about how in any oil spill volunteers or the civil society and NGO sector should be integrated. So that's an initial first lesson that needs to be learned. But then I think it's also important to start thinking a little bit broader than only speaking about Mauritius. I know this kind of the follow-up now is very, very important, but it's also crucial to think about the preventive dimension of this. How can we prevent future oil spills? And also, how can the small island state community actually work together? We have heard before about the incidents occurring in Solomon Islands, but there was also not that long ago an incident in Madagascar and so on. And ironically, all the legal side of things is in order. There's a regional agreement, and over the years there has been also a lot of investment in maritime surveillance and in the coordination of regional responses. So it's no time to think about how this can actually be practically implemented. How can the region, for instance, under the leadership, for instance, of the Indian Ocean Commission, actually establish something like a rapid response facility where the equipment as well as the expertise is there, and it can be employed exactly in these 2 weeks that were available. So these are the kind of questions to ask. I think independent inquiry into the events will be definitely needed. This could be led by the Indian Ocean Commission, for instance, or another body which has some authority. And that investigation also has to come up with the broader lessons and then ask what kind of preventive facilities can actually be put in place. So that's my main point here today, and I very much look forward to the discussion and look forward to take any kind of questions if it comes to the prevention, the Coast Guard, or the maritime security dimension of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian. We have a few questions, and I'm just trying. I know we have very few minutes left, but we'll try to get as many of them as we can. First question is for Don, but probably also relevant for Nicky and maybe for the rest of the panel, actually. You touch upon smart restoration following the spill. If we look for the silver lining resulting from this disaster, how, in your opinion, in light of historic oil spill, can we optimize our biodiversity in the future? Donald?
Yes, thank you. What I meant by smart restoration, so I'll use again the Deepwater Horizon as an example, where there were many sea turtles who were killed as a result of the spill. And so part of the restoration plan is not just to go and have a hatchery and grow more sea turtles and release them and to compensate for the ones that were lost, but to actually rebuild the habitat, the broader habitat, which is important for their nesting. Also to invest in it to reduce the other sources of their mortality, for example, bycatch in the fishery. So thinking more deeply and broadly about recovering those resources. And if you do that, if you rebuild the habitat where the nesting habitat for sea turtles are, you're also rebuilding habitat that's important for nesting birds and other things as well. So think about the system, the ecosystem, and restoring that as well as the individual species and their populations. Okay.
Thank you, Don. I'd just like to quickly pass to CJ from SINTEF to say a few words. I'll ask Lalini to divert the microphone to CJ.
Hi, SINTEF is a research organization in Norway, and we have done the initial oil weathering studies. The report has been provided to the response. So that information is available. We are hoping to get some samples from the spill so that we can check what has happened in the field with what we have looked at in the laboratories. We also do modeling. I was one of the oil spill modelers on the Deepwater Horizon. So we have experience in software as well. There's other groups I'm sure that are very able to help.
Thank you. One other question we have is regarding what would be your recommendation regarding the next priority with regard to restoring or supporting the impacted ecosystems, such as the fauna, the flora, people, etc. Now, this is more of a general question. I don't know if anyone wants to say a few words on that. Please maybe raise your hand so that we can pass to you the microphone. Okay, then maybe I will move to the next question, which I think is very interesting. And this question is asking about the role of military actors in preventing and post-oil spill recovery. If we view this oil spill disaster as national security threat to maritime security, the Army should take a bigger role in cleaning and preventing the disaster in the future. Does anyone has views on the role of the Army? Christian?
Yeah, I cannot say that much on the Army, but clearly on the Coast Guard. I mean, the way we should look at this is that Mauritius, the disaster was something like Mauritius 9/11, right? So it is in this scale. It is a national security issue. And because of that, I think in particular on the preventive side, not necessarily on the cleanup side now, the Coast Guard has the lead role in preventing something like that and closely monitoring what goes on in Mauritius waters. And this was clearly an event that could have been detected. And there has been such a substantial amount of investments in exactly maritime surveillance. And that's pretty good in terms of predicting general patterns. And it was originally established as part of the response to Somali piracy. But it has to get better in rapid responses, picking up the deviant behavior. And there's a lot of machine learning research being done on that. But in the end, the detection is not everything. It also depends on that then actually operational action is taken, and the Coast Guard actually goes out and not only tries to call them. So I find this sort of inappropriate what happened there, and of course there might be all sorts of reasons why it happened as it happened, but that really needs to play out differently, considering all the emphasis and focus on maritime domain awareness. I hope someone else can comment on the Army question, whether the military could contribute to the cleanup.
Thank you, Kristen. Vanessa, you want to say something from the Army?
Thank you. Just as Christian, I can't comment directly on the Army, but I think that this incident should really serve now as a kind of wake-up call for the authorities of Mauritius, and also activate, as it has, the NGOs to put pressure on the Mauritian authorities to ramp up the response planning that you have in the country. And there I really see an opportunity now for the NGOs as well to take their role and start determining how they could be of value to the operations. And as I see it, the value could be real, and that way you could be prepared for, hopefully, I'm knocking on wood here, not the next incident, but it is likely that this will happen again at some point. maybe not in Mauritius, but some other nearby country or island. So really use this as a kind of trampoline to jump up to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. The next question is about, so there's been a lot of talk about getting the front of the ships, that they are going to pull it and then sink it offshore. There's a question asking what can be done to stop the government from sinking the front half of the ship in the whale nursing ground. I'm going to go to you, Nikki, for this one, if you can say something about that.
Hello, thank you for that. It's important to recognise that with regard to the wreck, that the net environmental benefit will be carefully considered. It's not an option that people like doing, but it can often be the most environmentally beneficial option. Bearing in mind that before anything is sunken, the insides are cleaned, the oil has been removed, and they are sanitized to the best possible extent. Bear in mind that complicated wreck removals of large vessels have a huge footprint, require heavy assets in what is an exposed location. So I'm sure that the team deciding this will look at what is the most environmentally beneficial option, and this can often be the case.
Thank you. And I'll just stay with you, Nikki, on this question that we had earlier that no one really answered, which was just to remind you, what would be the recommendation regarding the next priority regarding restoring or supporting the impacted ecosystems such as the fauna, flora, and people?
So that's an interesting question and something that people don't often in emergency response look at. Actually removing the oil where it is beneficial, that is part of restoration. In remediation projects that are planned and not an emergency, removing the contaminant is an act of restoration in itself. So for me, really the priority is remove the bulk oil where it is safe to do so, and where further and more enhanced cleaning is required and safe and does not damage the environment, progress to that level. Once you have done that, you've gone a long way to reinstating that environment in at least the short term, and you can consider the other options based on environmental monitoring.
Thank you very much, Nikki. So that was the last question. I'd like to thank all our panel here and also our audience. It's a pity that we cannot do this live because I'm sure you would get a big round of applause, all of you. But thank you for your participation, and we had a very big audience today. So I will now pass back to Adish for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, everyone. I think these discussion and all the talks were excellent. I think we had a very good overview, and there are a few keywords that kept coming in. Myself, I work in humanitarian response and coordination, but in different contexts, never in oil spill. And obviously the coordination is the first thing that I understand that is coming up every time. A proper planning from day one, and the sampling and documenting everything from that point where the emergency start up to the monitoring and the long-term recovery phase after the response has happened. These were the key elements that I would take out after the discussion we've had now. So thank you. I will let Vikash close after that. One great thing that I would like to let you know about our initiative is that we will have also next week another webinar. This time it will be focused on health and public health, and we have some key experts also coming in, and from the Indian Ocean Commission who will be part of the panel. So just as a closing remark, allow me to pass Vikash on. Thank you very much, and hope to definitely see you next time. Thank you.
I was just about to say that I found this session truly enlightening, and I learned so much about oil spill pollution, and it's been absolutely enlightening. And I'm going to advise all my friends and colleagues, be it in government, be it in the civil society, whether it is on our website, I would say go and watch this this webinar, because there are so many answers that we get from this webinar. I've myself made like 3 pages of questions and things which I would have liked to react to, but I know that it's probably very early. Some of you may have to go to work, some of you may have to hit the sack very soon. But I mean, there's a lot that we can say. I mean, just a few things. This is for Mauritius a very steep learning curve. There have been a lot of criticisms. There have been a lot of things said about, you know, you should have done this better, you could have done this better, you could have saved time here, you could have this and that. All very valuable comments. And I'm sure that the next time that we get an oil spill, because I doubt it's going to be the last time we get an oil spill or a shipwreck in Mauritius, I think Mauritius is far better prepared for it than it has ever been. And there has been the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan, and but you know, there were drills being done, but there's nothing like being in the heat of an actual oil spill. And we have been very lucky in many respects. I mean, the ship contained only 4,000 tons of oil. I mean, it could have been far more than that. The ship struck us, and we could have been an oil spill at the very minute that it struck the wreck, and yet we had time to semi-organize ourselves in Mauritius. And you know, there's lots of things that can be said, and the cleaning is getting underway now, the deep cleaning of the environments, and again there we're learning quite a lot. One thing which is fantastic has been the mobilization of volunteers and civil society. I cannot recall when civil society in Mauritius just went out and just mugged in. Never ever can I, you know, I'm 48 soon. I know it happens after cyclones, but it only happens for 2 or 3 days. It happened after chikungunya, during chikungunya, where Mauritians just went out and cleared the place up. It happened during the Indian Ocean Games last year, where you could actually feel this patriotism, but never have we seen it to the extent that we've seen it during this Wakashio wreck. And it will continue. And yes, there are shortcomings, but I think Mauritius is learning from a lot of its mistakes and what could be done better. And I've got lots of questions for each and every one of you here. And I think I'll be sending lots of emails around to ask you some advice, and we really do need a lot of advice and assistance. So from me, I've been involved in a lot. I've been in committees that have been doing the decisions, taking the decisions, right or wrong, slow or hasty, or right ones at the right time. We have had a mix of those things. But I think this webinar has been truly enlightening and interesting for us. So I wish to thank you know, Adish, Lalini, and Nishal, and all those speakers who were here today and shared their vast experience on international experiences you gain it through a lot of mistakes. And I think this is what Mauritius is making mistakes now, so that we gain the experience for next time.
Thank you very much. Again, Christian, Donald, Nikki, Vanessa, RAISSA, Nishal, thank you very much. Vikash, your closing remark was very encouraging. A lot of hope and positivity, and thank you. We will be sharing our this recording and a summary of the key points of the discussion. Tune in for next week, hopefully, and talk to you soon. Thank you very much, and have a good day and good evening.